Welcome back to the VMware View Administration Training Series. Now that we've created some ThinApp packages, let's talk about how to deploy them. We're going to talk about the different types of execution modes that ThinApp provides to us. Then we'll talk about how we register packages so that they look like they're locally installed applications. We'll go over a few options that you have for deploying these packages. Then we'll wrap up the lecture discussing some security options you have with your ThinApp packages. We'll finish up with some actual live demonstrations of how to deploy these ThinApp packages. So let's start with our execution modes. The first option you have for executing these packages is a deployed execution model. In this model, the package is copied to the desktop and then executed from that local copy. Generally, you'll want to utilize a MSI deployment package that we create when creating the ThinApp package. This will automate a lot of the tasks that we normally would have to do for registering a ThinApp package. Using this MSI package blends in easily with software deployment tools like System Center Configuration Manager from Microsoft and other tools that are used to deploy software to desktops. Deployed execution is also the method you want to use when utilizing local mode desktops. If you don't push the package out to the virtual desktop and the user takes that desktop offline, they have no way to access their applications. The other execution mode option you have is to use a streamed execution. In this case, the package is executed directly from a network location, streamed across the network into the memory of the desktop. The shortcuts that you have within Windows to launch the application refer to a mapped drive or UNC path of the package out on the network. The package is then streamed directly into the RAM of the desktop with no caching to the disk, so no disk utilization is necessary. Having the packages executed off a central network location makes it easier for us to update them, because we can simply update the package and everyone will automatically have the new version without having to download it or update their local machine. This is the execution mode we usually choose when deploying virtual desktops or using ThinApp on physical desktops on a LAN environment. So we talked a little bit about registering the packages. So let's talk about what that means. When you register the package, you make it look like the ThinApp application is installed locally. This includes creating file extensions within the registry so that when you double-click on a document that has a .doc extension, Windows knows to call the ThinApp package that contains Microsoft Word. You'll also create the proper shortcuts on the desktop and start menu or other locations that you may want to specify. You'll also add an entry into the Add Remove Programs control panel, which is useful if you're using inventory tools to determine what applications are being run in what desktops. The entry that you see within the Add Remove Programs will use the inventory name parameter that we define on our package. You'll also include in parentheses the phrase VMware ThinApp to let you know that it's an actual ThinApp package. All this is accomplished utilizing the thinreg.exe utility that is provided with ThinApp. When using streamed execution mode, we usually run this utility through a script, more often than not in a login script. This executable is found in the installation directory for ThinApp. So one of the first steps you want to do when implementing a ThinApp infrastructure is to copy this utility from that installation directory out to the central file server so that every desktop can access it. And you'll want to run the thinreg utility once for every entry point that exists for the applications you want the users to have access to. Part of the automation that the MSI package provides us is automatically running thinreg to provide these local integration points with the operating system. Now that you know the basics of how ThinApp can be deployed, let's talk about some of the options you have for allowing users access to these packages. The first option is to use a software distribution application. These are applications like System Center Configuration Manager, Altiris, or even just Active Directory Group Policy software distribution. All of these will utilize the MSI package that automates the process of copying and registering the package on the local desktop. You will also want to configure the ThinApp sandbox to use the %appdata% structure. This will store it in the user's app data directory, which could be redirected out to the network. Second option is to use a USB distribution method. In this option, you would place the ThinApp package onto a USB thumb drive and provide the users this thumb drive. This option provides a high amount of portability for the package, because a user could take that USB stick, plug it into any Windows box, and be able to execute that package. When deploying on USB, you want to make sure to configure the sandbox to use the same directory as the package. This will store that sandbox on the USB drive, so that the user's customizations and changes that they make within the application stay consistent, even from one computer to the next. The third option we have is to use a login script. This will simply script out the execution of the thinreg.exe utility during the login process. You could use a batch file in order to deploy these applications through login process. But more often than not, I end up using a VB script so that you can apply logic to this registration process. In this process, I could use group membership to determine whether a user should have access to an application or not. When scripting out ThinReg, we are allowed to use wildcards, so we can easily register multiple entry points within a directory using only one command. Option 4 is a shortcut deployment method, where we can create shortcuts on the desktop and the Start menu to point back to the network location. Obviously, the file extensions and control panel entries will not be properly configured since ThinReg isn't being utilized to deploy the application to the desktop. Option 5 is to use VMware View to deploy the ThinApp packages to the desktops. We can do this based on either pools or individual desktops. If a ThinApp package is enabled for a particular pool or desktop, View will automatically register the ThinApp packages on the desktops during the creation of the pool or desktop. You do have the option to use either streamed or deployed execution mode for the ThinApp package. But if you want to use streamed, you need to make sure to set the MSI streaming variable to a value of 1 in your package.ini file. To be able to use ThinApp within VMware View, you need to make sure that when you create the package that you create an MSI file along with it, because View will use the MSI package rather than the ThinApp package itself. Now, the major downside of this option is the fact that it is not user or group aware. The desktops in the pool either have the application or they don't. There's no consideration as to different groups of users that may be using this pool. Final option we'll talk about is third-party applications. Profile Unity by Liquidware Labs is one great example of an application that automatically has built-in integration with ThinApp to deploy packages to View desktops or physical desktops. Any other application that can run a remote script can also register these applications for us. Finally, let's talk about securing our packages so that only authorized users can access them. The first thing we can do is define permitted groups within the package itself. We saw this during the Setup Capture Wizard process when we built our application. This will block any users that are not in the permitted groups list from executing the package. It will also prevent ThinReg from ever even registering this application within Windows. Next, we can use directory permissions on our network share where we're hosting these applications. ThinReg does run in user mode, so the user that's logging in must have access to the package in order to register it. If all of your ThinApp packages are in one directory tree, you can use the wildcard feature of ThinReg to register everything that the user can access in that directory. If the user doesn't have access, they won't be able to get to the package and won't be able to register it. Finally, you can use custom scripting in order to determine whether a user has access. This is done inside of the package before the application inside that package is launched. This allows you to use multiple different variables other than just group membership to allow or prevent access to the package. For example, you may only want an application to run at a certain time of day. Using a custom script within the package, you could check the time before the application is launched and potentially prevent it from executing if it's outtime that certain time range. Now we're on to the demonstration portion, where I'll show you the two most popular options for registering the ThinApp applications. We'll start with the more flexible of the two, the login script deployment. We'll start off this lesson, first of all, talking about how we can script the registration of a ThinApp package. This is our ThinApp packaging machine, reverted to its clean state. You can see here that inside of the packages directory, I've created a Mozilla Firefox 401 directory that contains both the MSI and the ThinApp package versions. I've also copied the thinreg.exe file from our ThinApp directory out to this NAS location. And I've created a batch file that we'll use to script out this registration. So let's go ahead and edit this file. To register an application is very simple actually. First thing we need to do is we need to execute the thinreg.exe file, which we'll do from our NAS location. So there we've referenced our thinreg.exe in this packages directory. Next, we need to provide the location of the ThinApp package itself that we want to register. We'll again use a UNC path to our NAS location. This time we'll use quotation marks around it, since we have directories and files that have spaces in them. So now we have the full path to our Firefox ThinApp package. With that in place, we can save this file, go ahead and close it, and execute it. We'll see that we now have a Firefox shortcut on our desktop and in our Start menu. You can see it's launching the ThinApp package. And now we have Firefox loaded. And it looks as if it was locally installed. But if we look at the properties of the shortcut, you can see that it's actually pointing to our file server and referring to our ThinApp package. To an end user, this now looks like Firefox is locally installed in the operating system, just as it would for any other system. In order to register this package during the login process, we need to create a group policy to run the login script. To do this, I've already created a Firefox ThinApp deployment GPO. So let's go in and edit it. Under the Policies, Windows Settings, we have a scripts for login and logoff. So let's look at the properties for our login scripts. All we need to do is simply click Add, browse out to our network share, and select the ThinApp registration batch file. And now we've defined a login script that will apply to every user account in our user accounts OU. Let's now give this login script a test by logging into a View desktop from our client machine. And we'll log in as Alexander and connect him to a desktop in the administrative pool. Now that the desktop is logged in, you can see that Firefox has already been registered. We'll look at the properties here and show that it is indeed pointing to our ThinApp package. So that's a simple example of how to use a login script to deploy ThinApp packages. There's of course a lot more power in the scripting than what I've shown here. Instead of using a bash file, we could use a VB script, and then place logic in there to only register ThinApp packages based on the user's group memberships. An easy way to do this is to create one user group for each ThinApp package, and use simple if-then statements to determine whether the user is in that group or not, and if they are, register the application. If they're not, skip on to the next one. Now let's move on to ThinApp's integration with Vue, and show how we can deploy packages using configuration within Vue Administrator Console. The first thing we need to do is set up our ThinApp repository. So add a repository, and we'll provide it a display name. We'll call this one NAS01 ThinApp repository. Then we'll enter the path to the share that contains our ThinApp packages. We could also provide a description if we like. We'll go ahead and click Save to create this repository. Now we need to go over to our ThinApps inventory section, where we'll scan for new ThinApps. We'll select our repository, and in this tree view, we'll select the proper directory where we want to start scanning for ThinApp packages, which is going to be our packages directory. It does a recursive search starting at that directory to find any MSI files that it can find. Of course, it finds our Mozilla Firefox package that we placed in that directory. I've also created a Google Chrome ThinApp package that I've placed in that directory as well. Using Control-Click, we can select multiple MSIs for it to scan. Clicking Scan, it'll actually go through those MSI files and make sure that they're actually ThinApp packages inside of there. It's found two ThinApp packages between those two MSI packages and have added them into our ThinApp inventory. Clicking Finish, we can now see our inventory contains both Firefox and Google Chrome. We can also create templates around our ThinApp packages. A template is simply a collection of multiple ThinApp packages that we want to deploy as a group. Let's go ahead and create one for Google Apps. And then we can choose which applications to add. In this case, we only have Google Chrome as a Google application, so we'll add just that one, and click OK. Clicking OK again, we'll create our template, which we can see down here. To assign an application to a pool, we can either do it using this template or using the ThinApp package itself. Let's go ahead and use the template. We click on this Add Assignment button, where we can select to deploy it to a pool or to desktops. We'll select Pools and choose our purchasers' pools. Clicking Add, we can also select other pools at the same time to deploy this to. We can also choose whether we want to stream the package or use a full deployment where it actually copies the entire package to the desktop. Since our purchasers' desktop pools can be taken offline, we want to go ahead and select Full here. One important note, if you want to support streaming through this interface, you need to make sure to edit the packages.ini file in the ThinApp project before building it. Inside of there, you'll find an MSI streaming value that by default is set to 0. If you set that to 1, streaming becomes available in this interface. We'll go ahead and click OK. And now we've assigned that application to that pool. So let's go ahead and log into that pool and see if our application works. We'll log in as James. Since James is entitled to the purchaser's pool. And we'll connect to his desktop. Now that James has his desktop, we can see he has both the Firefox application, which is coming in through the login script, and the Google Chrome application, which has been registered by View. Looking at the properties of this Google Chrome shortcut, we'll see that it's in the C program files Google Chrome VMware ThinApp directory and called Google Chrome exe. Executing this package, we'll see the ThinApp pop up, and we've gotten our full web browser experience. Taking a look in our startup menu, we'll see Google Chrome in here as well. So that's integrating ThinApp with VMware View. It's a very easy process, but does have the limitation that you can only apply applications to pools or desktops, which means that if you're going to use View to deploy your ThinApp applications, you'll need to make sure your pools are defined based on the applications that the users are going to have. So here are a few documents that will help you along the way. First of all, the ThinApp User's Guide contains a lot of great information about the deployment of these ThinApp packages. The ThinApp Deployment Guide talks a bit more in detail about the different options you have for deploying these packages. And of course, the View Administration Guide will provide you some great information on configuring the View and ThinApp integration. So let's wrap up by reviewing what we've covered so far in this lesson. We started by talking about execution modes. The two different execution modes are the deployed execution, where we actually push the ThinApp package out to the desktop device and execute it locally, and the streamed execution, where the package is run from a UNC path off of the network. We talked about how registering the package helps the ThinApp package look like it's a locally installed application. By creating shortcuts on the desktop and the Start menu, file extension entries in the registry, and entries in the Add Remove Programs control panel. We also discussed how the thinreg.exe utility works to help us with this registration process. Next, we went through some options that you have for deploying ThinApp packages out to the user's desktops. These options included software distribution applications, USB devices, login scripts, which we also demonstrated, shortcut deployment, utilizing integration with VMware View, which we also demonstrated, and third-party applications that are built for deploying ThinApp packages. Then we talked about how to secure your packages, using both internal processes within the ThinApp package and using directory permissions on your network share location. Then I actually showed you how to use both the login script deployment method and the integration that ThinApp has with VMware View. So that'll wrap up this lesson. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.